New York City, 1911. Professor Daniel Gregory Mason pronounced an elegy on the death of the Republic. Ragtime is the musical expression of an attitude toward life, an attitude shallow, restless, avid of excitement, a meaningless stir-about, commotion without purpose. The land of Lincoln and Emerson has degenerated until nothing remains of it but jerk and rattle.
Come on in here, Alexander's ragtime band. Come on in here, it's the best band in the land. They can play the bugle call like you never heard before. Sounds so natural that you want to go to war. That's just the best band in the land. Oh, honey lamb, come on along, let me take you by the hand. Up to the man, who is the leader of the band. And if you feel the the Suwannee River, played in ragtime. Come on in here, Alexander's ragtime band.
I well remember that I was making sandcastles, and a band on a pier was playing that tune when my father came down on the sands and said, "We're at war with Germany." That tune was played all around the world, and its composer was the archetype of the poor European immigrant coming in through Ellis Island in the arms of a mother in a shawl. He was Irving Berlin, one of 9 children of a rabbi whose Siberian village home had been burned in a pogrom. In New York, the father worked his way up to be, on weekdays, a meat supervisor in a kosher butcher's, and on the Sabbath, a deputy cantor. He died when young Israel was 8, so Izzy had had all the schooling he'd ever get, and incidentally, he stayed a musical illiterate all his life. He went out on the streets and sold newspapers. He was paid for a time for leading a blind beggar singer. He became a singing waiter himself, and at 18, he wrote his first song. On the sheet music, they printed by mistake the name Berlin, and ever afterwards, he would be Irving Berlin. He got going early and fast, churning out songs in the current dialect mode: Yiddish a Nightingale, Yiddle on your fiddle, Goodbye Becky Cohen, That's my gal. There was no offense in those days in such titles. And when ragtime came along, he was first on its jerky bandwagon. The America of Lincoln and Emerson never impinged on the beer hall and brothel where he'd lately been a singing waiter. And I'm afraid the professor's sermon had no effect whatsoever on him. He came up with,
everybody's doing it, doing it, doing it. Everybody's doing it, doing it, doing it. See that ragtime couple over there? Watch them throw their shoulders in the air. Snap their fingers, honey, I declare it's a bear, it's a bear, it's a bear. Everybody's doing it, doing it, doing it. Everybody's doing it, doing it, doing it. Ain't that music touching your heart? Hear that trombone busting apart. Come, 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 let us start. Everybody's doing it now.
From that time on, for 40 years or so, nobody in American music was quicker to sense a trend and annex it for his own, and make a mint with every switch of fashion. By the time America was in the First World War, he was the all-American music man, and he proudly assumed that he'd be called on to entertain the troops. but they got to him before he got to them. In a word, he was drafted. And a newspaper came out with the triumphant headline, U.S. takes Berlin.
I've been a soldier quite a while, and I would like to state the life is simply wonderful. The army food is great. I sleep with 97 others in a wooden hut. I love them all. They all love me. It's very lovely, but oh, how I hate to get up in the morning. Oh, how I'd love to remain in bed. For the hardest blow of all is to hear the bugler call. You gotta get up, you gotta get up, you gotta get up this morning. Someday I'm going to murder the bugler. Someday they're going to find him dead. I'll amputate his reveille and step upon it heavily and spend the rest of my life in bed. Oh, how I hate to get up in the morning.
1919 was not the happiest year in American history. Race riots, national strikes, but it was lightened by the visit of the Prince of Wales. One girl who danced with him was the daughter of a multimillionaire named Clarence Mackay. Irving Berlin danced with her too and fell in love. What was worse, she fell in love with him. To Mr. Mackay, the rich Catholic layman, no more ghastly day of judgment could be imagined than the wedding day of his precious Ellen and the wispy little immigrant Russian Jew. Mackay sent his daughter off to Europe and beyond to forget it. And when she'd gone, Berlin abruptly changed his style, and he wrote a song for her.
What'll I do when you are far away and I am blue? What'll I do? What'll I do when I'm wondering who is kissing you? What'll I do? What'll I do with just a photograph to tell my troubles to? When I'm alone with only dreams of you that won't come true, what'll I do?
She was maybe farther away than he knew, in Egypt. And for 2 tortured years, blessed years for us, Berlin sent these waltzing love letters across the ocean and imagined her faithfully responding.
All alone, I'm so all alone. There is no one else but you. All alone by the telephone, waiting for a ring, a ting-a-ling. I'm all alone every evening, all alone feeling blue, wondering where you are and how you are, and if you are all alone too.
Well, the next winter she was still 3,000 miles away at least, and Berlin, no longer the ragtime king but now the waltz king, wrote the third of the 4 waltzes that will always encapsulate in 3/4 time the romance of Ellen Mackey and Irving Berlin.
I'll be loving you always with a love that's true, always. When the things you've planned need a helping hand, I will understand. Always days may not be fair, always. That's when I'll be there, always. Not for just an hour, not for just a day, not for just a year, but always.
You know, many years later, Berlin pooh-poohed the notion that when he wrote these incomparable waltzes, he was writing out of his own sadness. He was simply, he said, following the trend. But after all, he'd set it, and he was in love, and Ellen Mackey was a long way off and defying her father. There must have been anxieties and recriminations, though I imagine that, like you and me, neither party would now admit to them. Songs, like dreams, don't grow on trees. And in the last of the cycle, there's more than a hint of the sinking feeling that comes to every lover who at some time or another fears the worst.
Remember the night you said, I love you. Remember you vowed by all the stars above you. Remember we found a lonely spot, and after forget me not, but you forgot to remember.
Well, at the beginning of 1926, Mr. Mackey called in Berlin and hurled his ultimatum. The day you marry my daughter, he said, I'll disinherit her. And Berlin replied, the day I marry your daughter, I'll settle $2 million on her, which was a point that had not crossed the mind of Mr. Mackey, who'd been brought up like a prince. What must have needled his pride was the unblinkable fact that his own mother had been a laundress and his father a poor miner who sank a pick in a mountainside and came up with $25 million worth of silver. Clarence Mackey, he once told a friend of mine with absolute seriousness, and with that 25 million as a nucleus, my father was able to make his fortune. Some nucleus. Another knife in Mackey's wound was the dreadful news that while Ellen was in Europe, supposedly safe in quarantine, she'd gone to Rome, had a special audience with the Pope, and got a dispensation to marry Berlin. Well, with Mackey not present and in fact sulking for years, Irving Berlin and Ellen Mackey were married in 1926, and the papers wrote reams of rags and riches, epics, ignoring the fact that one multimillionaire was marrying the daughter of another. As a wedding present, by the way, Berlin assigned the royalties in Always to his wife in perpetuity, and she made in all about $500,000 out of it. Well, now they settled into, as it turned out, 50-odd years of devotion. Now, as Berlin wrote, everything was blue skies. Anybody who could possibly be curious about the pianist on that one, may I say, as casually as possible, that it was a disc I cut 20 years ago. Now we're in the shank of the 20s, 1927 to be exact, and Berlin, happy and domesticated, went into an anxious time. The ideas didn't exactly cease to flow, but they dribbled. He used to search through the newspapers for themes, and he wrote a forgotten number about Charles Lindbergh called "Why Should He Fly at So Much a Week When He Could Be the Sheik of Paris?" He did have one more beautiful waltz in his head, but its title was something of an omen for him, and a couple of years later, for America. It was called "The Song Is Ended."
The song is ended, but the melody lingers on. You and the song are gone, but the melody lingers on. The night was splendid, and the melody seemed to say, summer will pass away. Take your happiness while you may. There 'neath the light of the moon, we sang a love song that ended too soon. The moon descended, and I found with the break of dawn, you and the song had gone, but the melody lingers on.
In October 1929 came the colossal Wall Street crash, and a lot of Berlin's millions went with it. His first Depression song was in a quite new tempo, and treats with sour disillusion the Park Avenue swells who once had lots of dollars, but now had to cover up their penury by putting on the Ritz. It was written for the veteran song and dance man Harry Richmond, but nobody, I think, ever sang it better than Fred Astaire.
Have you seen the well-to-do up and down Park Avenue on that famous thoroughfare with their noses in the air, high hats and arrow collars, white spats and lots of dollars, spending every dime for a wonderful time? If you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where fashion sits putting on the Ritz. Different types who wear a day coat, pants with stripes and cutaway coat, perfect fit. Putting on the Ritz. Dressed up like $1 million trooper, trying hard to look like Gary Cooper. Super duper, come let's mix where Rockefellers walk with sticks or umbrellas in their midst. Putting on the Ritz. Tips his hat just like an English chappie to a lady with a wealthy pappy. Very snappy, you'll declare it's simply topping to be there and hear them swapping smart tidbits. Put on the Ritz.
As the Depression deepened, Berlin actually went broke. He had to take out a bank loan for what was for him a paltry $10,000, but in 1932, that was quite a feat in itself. However, unlike a legion of stockbrokers and bankers, he was able to offer as collateral his talent. Happily, he had not dried up. The tunes started to spout again, and in the terrible year of 1933, when we confidently expected a revolution, he put on a show with Ethel Waters as the star called As Thousands Cheer. It was a revue, and to cue in each big number, he used the simple and effective device of flashing a newspaper headline on a big on-stage screen. They were true headlines. This one was about the most famous of American black expatriates, the girl from Philadelphia who had become the great exotic of French nightlife. The headline said, Josephine Baker, still rage of Paris. Berlin imagined her in a homesick mood, in Harlem on my mind.
Emeralds in my bracelet, diamonds in my ring, a Riviera chateau and a lot of other things, and I'm blue, so blue am I. Lots of ready money in 7 different banks. I counted up this morning, it was about 1 million francs, and I'm blue, so blue, and I know why. I've got Harlem on my mind, and I'm longing to be low down, and my parlez-vous will not ring true with Harlem on my mind. I've been dined and I've been wined, but I'm heading for a showdown, 'cause I can't go on from night to dawn with Harlem on my mind. I go to supper with a French marquis each evening after the show. My lips begin to whisper, mon chéri, but my heart keeps singing, Heidi-ho. I've become too damned refined, and at night I hate to go down to that highfalutin flat that Lady Mendel designed, with Harlem on my mind.
In the Depression, it need hardly be said, no Americans were nearer the bottom of the heap than the Negroes. and wherever the Ku Klux Klan tramped off carrying its fiery crosses, some Negro or other was in danger of being lynched. The stage headline blazed out, "Unknown Negro lynched by mob."
Set the table, 'cause it's supper time. Somehow I'm not able, 'cause that man of mine ain't coming home no more. Telling that man of mine ain't coming home no more. How I keep explaining when they ask me where he's gone. From crying when I bring their supper on. How can I remind them to pray at their humble board? How can I be thankful when they start to thank the Lord? Lord, supper time. I should set the table, 'cause it's supper time. Somehow I'm not able, 'cause that man of mine ain't coming home no more. Ain't coming home no more.
Plainly, Berlin had developed a new touch, far from ragtime or plaintive waltzes, but just as confident. And by now, he'd made another fortune. And here, the Clarence-Mackey feud took a final and ironical turn. Mackey had inherited the Postal Telegraph Company. He sold it, when the crash came, for ITT shares, which promptly tumbled into the pit, till Mackey was absolutely broke. And after the bonanza of As Thousands Cheer, his son-in-law stepped in and made him solvent with a gift of $500,000. Need I add that it was enough to subsidize a permanent reconciliation? Well, while millions of Americans were foregoing the rent or mortgaging the farm, Berlin was lifting up their spirits and, incidentally, still practicing the Midas touch. He was now in Hollywood, and in 1935 he came through with the glory of his career, Top Hat. Everybody, I suppose, knows most of it, but I don't think we should deny ourselves a fond recollection of it, and of the man who, Berlin said, was a joy and an inspiration to work with. Without Fred Astaire, Berlin swore, I'd never have written Top Hat, Cheek to Cheek, or Isn't It a Lovely Day? Hitler went on the rampage in Europe, America had a defensive urge to draw in on herself. There was, I remember, a flurry of patriotic shows insisting, and all the more insistent because we knew it couldn't be, that if Europe went under, America would stay safe and sound inside her own ramparts. Berlin dragged out a song written and rejected by him as being too sticky, for a 1918 Army show. And it became in 1939 practically a second national anthem, a sort of American land of hope and glory. In 1940, he wrote a show which was the big theatrical attraction of the New York World's Fair. It's now almost totally neglected, to many people never known. But it shows that even in an orgy of flag waving, and by the way, all the huge royalties of God Bless America went to the Boy Scouts, with the revenue from his patriotic songs, he was always the grateful immigrant. I was saying that war or no war, he could always be mesmerized by a sneaky tune. And this one is no more than a rollicking tribute to New Orleans. Is the title song of the show, Louisiana Purchase.
Louisiana Purchase, I'll tell you what it means. It means I like to sell you New Orleans. Come on, and you can go to town, way down in New Orleans. Louisiana salesman with nothing in his jeans. That's why he'd like to sell you New Orleans. Come on, and do all the things there are to do in New Orleans. Where does that heat come from? That rhythmic beat come from? And that red meat come from? New Orleans, Louisiana Purchase. I told you what it means. It means I like to sell you New Orleans.
Come on, and you can go to town, way down in New Orleans.
As far as I'm concerned, the memorable, the best Berlin is the Waltz series and Top Hat. But unlike practically all his rivals, he didn't show any perceptible decline. In his late 50s, he wrote the splendid Annie Get Your Gun, and in his 60s, he wrote Call Me Madam. And he might have gone on and on. In his 75th year, he wrote a merely medium good show, and that was it. Let's end by reminding ourselves how much melody the old man had in him, with two of his most lilting later songs. The first from Call Me Madam, You're Just in Love.
I hear singing, and there's no one there. I smell blossoms, and the trees are bare. All day long I seem to walk on air. I wonder why.
And he still has the inventiveness to throw in a counter melody.
I hear singing and there's no one
Not
there.
so surprising. You feel very strange, but nice. Not told in a patter. I know just what's the matter, because I've been there once or twice. Put your head on my shoulder, sleep soft, shoulder, up, down, with a velvet line. There's nothing you can take to relieve that pleasant ache.
Twinkling in my eyes, I wonder why.
Well, a seeming simple but canny man who, as Harry Ruby once replied to some curmudgeon, sure, Irving Berlin, he can't write music. His songs are hits because he has a drag with 150 million people. For plenty of good reasons. A swinging sense of rhythm, a sure melodic gift, an instinct for knowing what would take and when. And don't forget, he wrote all his own lyrics. All I need, he once said in his reedy little voice, is a catchy phrase that anybody can understand. Like, I got the sun in the morning and the moon at night.
Got no butler, got no maid. Still I think I've been overpaid. I got the sun in the morning and the moon at night. Got no silver, got no gold. What I got came